So I messaged her and I just said, oh, thank you so much for everything. It was so nice to, like, you had such a great personal touch, such a great bedside manner. Thank you for being so emotionally available for us. And she responded with this one-liner that just blew my socks off that relates to you telling me about the openness. She said, I've never seen anybody let the angels carry them the way that you did.
Wow.
She could feel the angels in the room and she could feel me letting them carry me. And I never even thought of that concept.
Welcome to the Light the Day podcast, where we explore spiritually transformative experiences. I'm your host, Julie Clough, and today I have special guest Camille McConnell with me. Hi, Camille.
Hi. Hey, thanks for having me.
It's so good to have you here. Will you introduce yourself before we get started with your story?
Yeah. So, me and my husband live in northern Utah. We're originally both from Southern California. We're both really into water sports, e-foil surfing, scuba diving, wake surfing behind a boat, which is like big water people. We have 5 kids, and I work as a grief coach and a medium. And that's me.
Let's go back and start wherever you feel is relevant, because I know, like you just introduced yourself as a medium. So there's a story there.
Mm-hmm.
So take us back to kind of the beginning of that story of what happened and why you're doing that work.
Yeah, I think ever since I was a kid, I was one of those really perceptive old souls that would just notice things. I remember as a kid hearing a voice that didn't belong to anyone. I was alone in a room. I had the chicken pox. I was really sick. And I heard this piercing whisper telling me to be quiet, because what was happening was I was like fussing and crying and scratching and my chicken pox. And it was just like, if you will just calm yourself down, you'll feel better kind of thing. And I did, but it was alarming. I knew it wasn't my mom because she had left the room. I was all by myself and I heard this piercing whisper. And so that was my first experience with, I would say, a positive encounter. When I was a kid, I did have some scary kind of like shadow experiences where I'd see things. Not a ton. And then I had that experience as a 9-year-old hearing the whisper. And then I started having spiritually significant dreams when I was about 14 years old. And I started noticing, like, I'd wake up and I've always remembered my dreams, and they're very vivid. They're in color. Some of them are really detailed. And I woke up from this one and I thought, this isn't just like a random dream. This is a message. And so I remember writing down the details of it. And then as I was doing that, the spiritual significance of it sort of made itself known, as I was mulling it over. And so that was the beginning of that. And then my grandma passed when I was in my 20s. We weren't especially close, but I remember sitting before her funeral. We had this family memorial service, and I had not grown up living by my grandma. I was a couple states away, and most of my cousins had. And so they were sharing all these stories, and like they really got to know her. They're like, oh, on Saturdays we would do this. And I was like, I have no idea. I just saw her once a year. And I remember sitting there thinking, I didn't really get a lot of time with my grandma. And I heard her respond back to me in my mind. And she said, well, now I can go with you anywhere you go.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, are you? And when you're in grief, you don't really question things like you normally would. You're maybe more accepting and open because you're sad and you're just vulnerable. And so I just was like, okay, my grandma's talking to me. And I was like, well, while I have you here, I did have this like dilemma I was dealing with at the time in my life. And so I was like, what's your opinion on this? She gave me her opinion on it. I was like, that's pretty incredible. So it was a gift that happened to me. I couldn't turn it on necessarily. It just sporadically would happen. I also felt my grandma come to me when I was at a very low point. My husband had just graduated law school. It was the recession. Jobs were scarce. He went without work for a long time. he did get this one job, and we moved a few hours north for it. We were in California. And the guy he was working for ended up being so dishonest. It was just a really bad situation. So we left, but I got pregnant when he had the job because we thought we had job security.
Right.
So we were about to have our second baby. He had no job. I was supporting the family as a Spanish tutor, and we were apartment managers. But it just felt very bleak. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night having like a panic attack. I just was overwhelmed, and I felt my grandma come. It was interesting. I was actually saying a prayer, asking God to strengthen me because I was panicking. I was like, I need help right now in this moment. I'm freaking out. Come calm me down and whisper peace to my soul. And as I was praying, I heard God say, your grandma's here and you can talk to her. And I was like, is that allowed? I grew up in a conservative Christian home where we weren't really taught about your loved ones pass away and you can talk to them through the veil and it's pretty normal and they might talk back. And like, that's just the way of the world. I didn't know any of that stuff. So I was like, okay. So I just spilled my heart to her. I just dumped everything. And she just sat there and listened, and I could feel her particular personality. She would call me sweetheart, and I could feel like it's like I could hear her voice in my head, and I could feel her energy, her personality, and feel her responses to me. And it was just this really sacred, transformative experience for me with realizing that I can pick up on so much. There were so many senses involved. It's like I heard her voice, I could feel her personality, sense her responses. It was a real conversation. So that was amazing. And then a few years later, a very close family friend passed. She was like a second mom to me. I spent so much time at their house growing up. I was always there. And she died really unexpectedly. And I had some experiences where I felt her. I had some dreams with her, and then other times where I could hear her telling me something. And I was like, this is so cool. I didn't know this was possible. And I also had she had a really good sense of humor. And I had some lighthearted experiences with her where like there was this dream and she was teasing me about something she would have totally teased me about. And I was just like, it doesn't always have to be when we're at our lowest of lows that they come and they swoop in and they pick us up and they, give us comfort and cheer. It can also just be like a silly random joke. Like they just want to connect with us in a variety of ways. And so then I felt like that was adding to my file, of like what this gift is and what is possible. And then my son unexpectedly passed away, my third child. His name's Wesley. He passed away when he was 3. And that completely, of course, threw our world just upside down. It was really tragic and unexpected. He passed from choking on a bolt that fell out of his toddler bed. It was wow. Loose. Yeah, it was just like on Memorial Day. He was gonna take a nap, and then we were gonna go to the pool and have a barbecue. And instead, I found myself in the emergency room barefoot. And they just told me like it was an unrecoverable accident, and they were able to get the bolt out really quickly. First responders were here so fast. On paper, he was only not breathing for about a minute and a half. So on paper, he should have survived, really. Like we can survive a lot longer without oxygen. But I had a lot of experiences after he passed telling me like this was actually the plan for him. And so because of these previous experiences, I knew that I could have some sort of an ongoing relationship with my son. And I was surely going to like pursue what was possible, and not just kind of play along with those platitudes of, well, at least you'll see him again, and aren't you so grateful that you will, because of God and Jesus. Like, yes, I am grateful, and yes, I really do appreciate that. But like I someone a very like well-wishing, she had good intentions. She said to me, aren't you just so grateful, you're going to see him again? And I looked her straight in the eye and I said, yes, but that is not enough. I'm going to continue a relationship with him in the present because that's possible. And I'm not going to settle for anything less.
Wow.
And I knew it was possible. It's like, of course I'm going to go, that term, I'll go to hell and back. I'll go to heaven and back. Like, I'll do what I need to do to learn. So I dove into near death experiences, and I was reading dozens of them from a variety of sources. Like, I would read these compilation books with a variety of people from different cultures and backgrounds, different ages. And I found a lot of common threads, and it was really comforting for me. I took a class in spirit communication with the intent only to communicate with my son. It was just for my relationship with him, because what I noticed is that after he first passed, I felt him around a lot. I could feel what he was trying to say to me. I could feel his emotion. He wanted to like hug me and protect me from these feelings, and he was concerned for me. He felt the grief and he wanted to stick around. But then I slowly kind of felt him, it felt like he was backing off or he was going somewhere else, and that was really devastating. And so as I studied more, I realized like they don't just come in with these like strong feelings. Sometimes it's just little thoughts we get, you know? It's the subtle things that you could completely miss if you didn't know what to look out for. You know, like I'm folding laundry, not thinking about anything, and all of a sudden he pops into my head. That's just not that. And then I realized like that could be him coming in to say hi. So I would ask Wesley, is that you? And sometimes then I'd feel a quick little like, yes, you know, that it was that feeling of like, this resonates and this feels true to my soul. And so I realized that like he was giving me a little bit less strong of signals, because it was an invitation, because I was supposed to learn different ways he communicated. So I wasn't just relying on this one way of feeling him. And so it helped me expand my ability to communicate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, there's so much to talk about here, but first, I'm so sorry about your son's passing. How many years ago was that?
It's been 6.5 years.
6.5 years. Wow.
Yeah, he was almost 4. So
Almost
he was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so many things that you mentioned there. One thing that I picked up on was just the openness, that you had the openness, you had the you weren't pushing these experiences away, you were inviting them in, you were open to it. Even if you didn't know exactly what to do with them, you were open to it.
That's so interesting that you said that. So we went to the hospital. He was life flighted. We drove. There wasn't room on that helicopter for us. We went to the hospital, and then like they were doing chest compressions the whole time. And when we got there, it felt like a scene from a movie. They're like coming through the ambulance entrance, and then they had us go to this room, and this doctor comes in, and she has that like look on her face where you already know what she's going to say to you before she says it, and you just feel bad for her that she has to be the one to do it. And she just like looked down and said, "I'm so sorry. This is an unrecoverable accident. Your son didn't make it." And then she said, "You can come in where we're doing chest compressions. We wanted to keep him alive to like for you to say goodbye, you know, before we pull him off life support or whatever, or stop doing the compressions." And so we did. And it hit me really hard as soon as she like left the room. Like, this was actually kind of his plan. This wasn't a mistake or an accident. Like, this was a preconceived plan for his life, for his journey. And when we got into, then they transferred him, or the ones doing the chest compressions, they left, and they just kind of let us be in this triage room. And they told us we could take as much time as we needed. Then there was this nurse that came in, and she was wonderful. And I really liked her. And I felt like we kind of had a little trauma bond, because they don't actually see they don't get a lot of deaths, even in the emergency room. It's not like it happens every day, right? It's more rare. And she was just really wonderful and so real. And we could just, I just really appreciated her. And then we spent a few hours with him, and then, we went home. And it was interesting because my husband got a text later that day from a kid he'd grown up with, a family friend in San Diego. And she said, "Was so-and-so your nurse today at the hospital?" And he was like, "Yeah, that was her name. Her name is Shannon." She's like, "Well, she's a friend of mine. And the only reason I know about this is because she had a really hard day at work. So she made a really vague post on Instagram just about how it was a hard day. And so she had her husband bring her kids to give them a hug at break so she could just hold her babies." And she didn't give any details. She didn't break HIPAA. but it was really impactful. And so I looked her up on Instagram. Like, lo and behold, she's an influencer who has like 100,000+ followers, and she posts tips to parents, like health, like nursing tips and stuff. So I messaged her and I just said, "Oh, thank you so much for everything. It was so nice to, like, you had such a great personal touch, such a great bedside manner. Thank you for being so emotionally available for us." And she responded with this one liner that just blew my socks off, that relates to you telling me about the openness. She said, "I've never seen anybody let the angels carry them the way that you did."
Wow.
She could feel the angels in the room and she could feel me letting them carry me. And I never even thought of that concept, you know?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, really amazing.
Yeah. So it was so impactful. That line kept going through my head, "Let the angels carry you." Um, I had a little miraculous experience after my son died. I'm a singer and songwriter. And as any creative person does, you go through certain blocks at times where you're like, I can't finish a song. Had written a couple things, and it just felt like I didn't know what to do with them. And it felt like an unfinished story for me. So after my son died, 3 days later, or 2 days later, I was walking down the stairs after waking up, and I was just felt so physically heavy that I stopped halfway down the stairs to sit. Cause I was just, your body feels like it's full of lead. And I just remember sitting there and sighing and thinking, "Oh, sweet boy," because he was such a sweet soul. And as I was thinking these words, "Oh, sweet boy," I had this lyric, like this melody, float through my mind as if it was a song lyric, accompanying these words. And I was like, okay. And then more words and more lyrics and more melody started floating through my head. And I was like, I think I'm writing a song right now, but I'm not really writing it, like it's being given to me. So I started noting it down. And before I knew it, by midday, I had finished this beautiful song about Wesley. I called it Wesley's song, and it's, "Oh, sweet boy, you were loved before you were born," and it goes on to like just this legacy that he left. And, it was interesting because I was like, that's so cool that, heaven gave me this download. And I heard, as I was like thanking God, I heard him tell me, "I want you to do something with this. I want you to sing this at his funeral." And I was like, oh my gosh, that's a big ask. I just wrote it. I don't know how I'm going to get it out. Like, I play piano, but I don't like accompany myself when I write songs. I don't have that kind of skill to just like make it up and have it sound good. It would be like one finger, da, 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 da. You know what I mean? Like, I just didn't have the time. I didn't have the time to put into developing it. And so I have a friend who he was a voice teacher of mine, and he told me he would come and do it because he's very talented on the piano. So it was like all came to, like, it was all meant to be. And it was this beautiful gift because I hadn't been able to like finish the song and feel like there was a purpose for it, And then after my son died, 3 days later, my mother-in-law passed away from heart failure. And so we went to her funeral in San Diego the following weekend after his funeral. And while we were there, I had this other song come to me just the same way. It just was like sprinkled into my brain from heaven. And I wrote it down, and it was called "Let the Angels Carry You."
Wow.
Yeah. And I ended up writing a bunch more songs as through my grief journey. I felt like the heavens opened up to help me, like, with this desire I had to share my music and like let my voice be heard. And I didn't know what to do with it before. And after Wesley died, it was like, you're supposed to help other people heal with your music. I even had a friend who's very close to the other side have a dream where my grandma showed up and told her 3 times, "You need to tell Camille to keep writing music because it heals us all."
Wow. Wow. It's really unusual, I feel like, to see that much purpose that quickly after such a tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you're still like an emotional mess and trying to make sense of it all. It's almost like the grief stages were all happening at the same time for me. I was feeling denial for sure. Like, I couldn't even wrap my head around it. There was some anger. I didn't have a ton of anger at first though, because I felt so much like messaging about how this was his plan. so that I wasn't really blocked by anger. But of course there was still those feelings intermixed. And then the bargaining, like, I could have done this. What if we had done that? But then that resounding feeling of this was his plan, even sitting at his funeral, I felt God tell me, this has been on the calendar for a long time. Today was supposed to be the day for his funeral. This has been the plan for a long time. So it was like kind of hard to argue with that, even though, the mortal brain will argue because that's what we do. We're human. And then the spiritual side of me was like, well, I feel like this is his plan. So there was kind of like that battle going on. And then I was also feeling acceptance from the get-go and making meaning by taking this tragedy and creating something beautiful from the ashes, which is like this song that's been in my heart, but that's been stuck inside for years. I went to therapy trying to like, I don't know what to do. I can't do music and it's stuck inside of me. And the therapist would just stare at me like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I don't know, like maybe go like to voice, go to music lessons. And it just like, it was just this like unanswered piece of my heart that hadn't like been able to like expose itself. And so it was all these things in the same moment, I'm having the human experience, I'm having a spiritual experience. And so it was very layered and I don't know. It was unusual. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and another thing that I've noticed, and I can appreciate the kind of that beginning of feeling him around, in the beginning and having that connection early on, and then kind of losing that a little bit. But I think a lot of times what happens is the grief becomes so heavy that just puts us at a frequency where we can't,
Right.
where it's challenging to connect. But your openness, you paid attention. The other things that's striking me about your story is that you were receiving this information, you were receiving these messages, and it was like new information. It wasn't, it was, I think sometimes that helps us to get our human brain out of the way. But it was like, I wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because this was a completely new experience for me. I mean, I had lost people that I loved, but never anyone in my immediate family, not a child.
No,
It's a
sure.
gutting feeling. It's a gutting experience. You feel kind of like a pawn.
Yeah.
Our biological wiring is to keep our children here. And when we can't do that, it's very harsh, right?
Well, and I'm also struck by your confidence and your trust in God, in a soul plan, and spirit. There's, I think it's really remarkable to have built that level of trust that something this overwhelming can happen, and you can be in that space of feeling like, okay, this was meant to happen all along. But I'm sure there were phases in your grief and during your healing process where the heaviness of it
Oh,
really
yeah.
sunk in.
Oh, yeah. And I remember I still had I had another young child at home still. She's 2 when he passed. And I had 2 older kids. So I feel like the 2-year-old really got me out of bed in the morning because she needed help making her breakfast. She needed me to like be with her. She couldn't just be like left to herself. So I didn't ever feel that like at the beginning that, oh, I can't get out of bed feeling. But, after a couple of months, that grief, like you said, settles in kind of like a thick fog. And I remember laying in bed one time thinking, oh, I'd already gotten up with her and then I went back to lay down and I was like, what's the point? Like, what am I getting up for? And so the life coach in me, because I graduated from life coaching school 17 years ago. So this is like asking yourself questions and, analyzing your thoughts. That's hardwired into me. And so I was thinking, okay, what's the thought that's holding me down? What is the thought that's keeping me from wanting to get out of bed? And as I lay there and just kind of let myself have as much time as I needed for it to materialize, I realized that I was really believing the thought that I've lost my son. I've lost him. Like, that's so dark, right? Because at this point, I wasn't feeling that influx of angels or the other side, like, surrounding me. And so I didn't have that to lift me up anymore. And the grief was settling in more. Like, and so I just remember laying there thinking, I've lost my son. And so I went through the questions. I'm trained from the Byron Katie method, where you ask the core questions and you turn it around. I was like, is that true? Of course it's true. He died. Like, that's yes. So the second question is, can I absolutely know that that's true? And I wanted to just knee jerk reaction say yes, but there was a little bit more to it. It's like, well, yes, I know he's physically died, but sometimes I feel him, and I didn't know at that point how to have more consistency with that. It felt more like it happened to me. And, I wasn't exactly sure how to open myself to be more available to it. And then I've analyzed, how does this thought affect me? Like, it makes me want to just do nothing. I don't feel like getting up. I don't feel like life is worth living. It was really heavy. And then I asked myself, how would I be without it? If I didn't believe I've lost him, I felt lighter. I felt like there was hope or possibility. And so then I switched the thought to something that was more true. That was, my son has died. His physical body is not with me, but sometimes I feel his presence near. Because sometimes I could differentiate between, boom, he's like with me right now, versus like he's smiling down on me, he's aware, he's checking in, but I'm not like feeling it close, And I feel like as time went on, he did less of the boom, I'm here, and more of the checking in on you, mom, kind of thing. So being able to really sit with, what am I believing right now? Is it totally true, or is there something more true that would actually resonate with my soul? Because the whole philosophy is, if we believe things that aren't true, it makes us feel stuck, and it makes us feel like really, really bad inside. And if you align yourself with truth, then it's empowering, right? We need to find that real truth, that most accurate truth.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So much. So, one of the things that really strikes me when you talk about the truths and the untruths and so forth is, untruths make us weak. That is been tested through kinesiology over and over. It's been confirmed that when we say things that are untrue, it physically makes us weak.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. But when we can connect to truths, then it makes us stronger. And one of the things that really struck me when you were talking about going through this thought process that you had learned through Byron Katie, who, by the way, I love her work. I absolutely love her work. But one of the things that struck me was I felt and heard your son there with you in that moment. It was like when you were saying, okay, is this true? And you're like, yes, it's true. He died. But is it totally true? Is it fully true? And I hear your son. I mean, he's like right there going, Mom, that's not fully true.
Yeah.
So that there was that part of you that wanted to say, yes, this is completely true. But then that that whisper comes in and says, Mom, that's not completely true.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he's such a sweet little presence. It's hard to not hear him, He's very likable. He was like our sunshine boy. He was our only blonde kid. He was just a ray of sunshine. And it's so funny, actually, as we talk about grief and we talk about the little kind of things he inserts. We were flying on the plane to San Diego for my mother-in-law's funeral. And I'm just sitting there and I'm feeling that shock phase of grief where I'm like, how is this my life? Like, one funeral to the next. And losing my mother-in-law, there was a lot of complex grief there. It was a complicated relationship. And that had spanned several years. And it was just a lot to take in. And I was feeling a lot of guilt around my son's passing because, we're supposed to protect our kids. And he didn't want to take a nap that day. And it haunted me. He was like, Mom, please don't make me take a nap. If he didn't take a nap, he was crabby. And he was my easiest, best kid. But the crabby version of Wesley was not so much fun. So I was really like determined to get him to take a nap so we could enjoy the rest of the day. But what broke my heart is that the last thing he said, because people ask or say the worst things sometimes, and they ask me, what was the last thing you said to your son? As if it was a Hallmark movie that I tied up with a bow and I could present it to the world on a platter so they all feel good about it. That's not how it works, guys. It's a lot messier than that. So the last thing I said to my son was yelling at him, Wesley, just go take a nap. I was like, I had it, okay? And I usually didn't yell at him because he was such an angel. So that was haunting. But the thing is, he asked me in the cutest little voice. He came out before and he was like, Mom, if I'm really good, do I have to take a nap? And I was like, yes, Wesley. This was like the 5th time he'd come out. I was like, yes, you do. I knew he was tired. And that killed me, Julie, because I was like, I killed my son.
Mm.
It's almost like he didn't want to go back in there. It's almost like he was dreading it. Like he didn't want to take that nap. Like, it's my fault, you know? It was so heavy. So I'm on this airplane and I'm like just castigating myself. I'm really like, you know, it was my fault. I'm a terrible mom. I couldn't help but feel that way. And I felt Wesley, just like a little ping in my mind. And he was like, Mom, no, it's not your fault. Like, you know that you've been told several times that this was like, I was going to pass away. And I'm thinking, well, why couldn't you just died of an aneurysm? Why do I have to be the one who feels at fault? You know, I feel terrible. And he's like, and then he kind of reminded me there was this whole series of people involved that day, from first responders, police officer that came and held him while the first responders were coming, like the ambulance. And they were all really emotionally involved. And there was like 2 rows of them at his funeral. So I feel like there was supposed to be this drawn out process because his spirit was very touching. And I feel like his spirit was supposed to touch these people's lives. And I had one of the firefighters come over and express that to me a few weeks after he died. Like, it was supposed to be this dramatic saga that impacted people, okay? Not just like an aneurysm where we call and the coroner comes and takes his body away. But I was still blaming myself. And he was like, Mom, you know. I was like, I know. Why does it have to be so hard? Like, this is really, really damaging for me. And then I feel him come back while I'm on the airplane. And he's like, Mom, it's really not your fault. And I was like, I know, but I can't help but be mad at myself. Like, I don't know what else to do. And then the 3rd time he came back, it was so cute. He was like teasing me. He was like, Mom, do I have to get angry with you? Like, you know better, Mom. Come on, Mom. Don't make me get mad. And I was like, I couldn't help but just like want to laugh out loud because he was just so cute. He had his little head cocked to the side. I could just see him. And I'm like, if he can't get to me with like this loving, stern, like, you know, he comes in and pops in with humor. He's so cute. You know, it's just the way that he's communicated with me and the different tones he's taken and creative twists to try to get through to me.
Yeah. Well, and you know, and what you were saying about like the way that it happened, of course, I've had my own experience with that whole, you know, the way that things happen.
Right.
But when it's interesting when you said that, like, well, it could have just been a sudden like health thing. But in my, you know, then I'm like, okay, but if it was, Camille, you would have been, why didn't I notice symptoms before this? Why didn't I, like, you know, as a grief specialist yourself, I'm sure that you've seen everybody go through that what if game. Like, it's
everybody,
just part
even
of the
if it died of
process.
cancer and it was terminal and they knew it, they'll say, well, what if we had, you know, taken them to a different hospital that one time they had a flare up? Or what if we had had a different nurse come in for hospice? Like, there's constant barrage of should have, bargaining, what ifs. Like,
Yeah.
everybody does it. It's just a natural human tendency for sure.
It really is. It really is. And not to diminish the pain of, you know, the experience that you had at all. And I love that you talked about like our relationships are so much more than the last thing that we said to somebody.
Oh, yeah.
So much more.
Things not to say to people when they're grieving. I think people just don't know what to say, so they just sometimes word vomit comes out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what happened from this experience with your son to, and you were already a life coach, like you were already trained in that. So share a little bit about your experience with adding grief to your practice and mediumship specifically. Where did that come in,
Yeah.
because from hearing you before, it was like things would just drop in, but there wasn't a lot of, it wasn't like control over
Mm-hmm.
the, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with coaching, I took a break from coaching. I started having kids a couple years into coaching, and I was like, how can I manage phone calls with clients on a schedule when like babies and toddlers don't always keep a schedule? And there were too many times when my daughter would wake up from her nap early and she's screaming in her crib while I still have 30 minutes left with my on my coaching call. And I was like, we couldn't really afford childcare. And it was like so sporadic that the coaching was becoming more sporadic. And I just thought, I think it's time for me to put this on the back burner. And I had other entrepreneurial endeavors that worked out really well for our family. I had an online clothing store that I ran for like 12 years that I sold last year. And then after my son died, I had done some small business coaching for other e-commerce store owners, but I really wanted to take what I'd learned about grief and help other people. So I shifted my practice to grief coaching a couple years ago. And it just felt like it was time. I knew I was going to be selling the clothing business. It was time to transition because the clothing business was a nice filler, but it wasn't my heart. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
My heart was helping other people and putting my skills to use in that way. So that felt like a natural progression. And I wrote a book and I published it a year ago. And so that was something I'd been working on. It started out as a blog after my son died. And it's called Let the Angels Carry You. It's available on Amazon. But it was all kind of like fitting into what felt important in my life at the time. And then a friend of mine that I grew up with, she's been really open spiritually. Since she was a kid, her mom used to take her to go see psychics or mediums, and she was something that she dabbled in a little bit. Growing up in a more conservative faith, it was something I never considered. It was just off the table. It was like, no. And I had a friend whose grandma was a psychic, and her grandma was always kind of weird. And I'd heard stories about her doing like weird seances and like tables levitating and like creepy spirits, like not the good stuff. And so I always kind of, I'd always kind of assigned a bad label to that work. And then, how it does, things change after you lose a child, like your whole world just changes and you're willing to go to heaven and back to connect to them. So the reading near-death experiences really opened my mind up about who God and Jesus are. They're bigger than the box that sometimes we put them in religion. Maybe you try to fit them into the box that fits our religion when they're bigger, right? Like a religion, there's a lot of rules, like do this, don't do that. But a lot of the near-death experiences I was reading was just the main core message was how much love. Jesus is about love. That doesn't mean he wants us to go and like ruin our lives and make reckless choices, but above the rules, it was just love, right? And I feel like I was kind of missing that in my religious experience. And so it kind of broadened that, and it was beautiful. It made my box expand. And then I read a book. It sort of was a synchronicity that I fell upon it. It was about 9/11 victims, and it was written by one of the wives, a surviving wife of one of the workers in the tower. And she compiled stories. These men and women who died, a lot of them had premonitions. They had feelings like, I'm not going to make it to my 40th birthday. They didn't know why. They would write about it in their journals. And so she combined these different stories. And most of these families are actually pretty conservative Catholic. So they also don't really have a lot of experience with, spiritualism as far as like mediumship. But there was a New York medium who offered one free session for every 9/11 victim's family, just because she wanted to help them heal. And, the author, the one who compiled all these things, she's conservative Catholic. She's like, I would have never considered it because other victim families went and they told me what a healing experience it was. And I was at my rock bottom. She's like, I was open to it because I'm not going to say no to something that can help me feel better. I mean, I'm devastated. So she went and she had a healing experience. And I was like, oh, well, maybe there are mediums that are doing good work out there. I just don't know anything about it. And so then then I'm in this Facebook group, Another Synchronicity. Someone recommends the book Signs by Laura Lynn Jackson. It's a book, it was a Facebook group that somebody like more religious oriented. So it was kind of interesting that it was in there. And I thought, oh my gosh, I want to read that book. So I did. And I'm like, she's a good person. She's doing good work. I had no idea there were people doing this. This is amazing. And I recognized that gift in myself, but it was, like you said, more sporadic and less controlled. And so after I read that book, I thought I saw the Tyler Henry special on Netflix pop up. And before I would have been like off the table, I'm like, that's just not for me. I watched it with an open mind, and I actually really felt like the genuine sincerity from him. You know, one of my gifts is also picking up on people, and I can kind of read like, is this a good person? Do they have good intent here, or are they, you know, smoke screen and mirrors or kind of thing? I really picked up on his sincerity and that his gift is real, and I was like floored that there was people helping other people connect to their loved ones on the other side. How incredible is that, right? So then this good friend of mine reaches out and she's like, you'll never believe it, but I have met a medium. She called her a Mormon medium because we both grew up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that's our faith background. And we're both still, you know, we participate, but it's not normal it would be like there being a Catholic medium. It's like, really? That's a thing? And so, like a practicing Catholic medium, like what an interesting, like paradox. So she said, she's like, I had a reading from her and she connected to my grandma. It was incredibly healing. It was amazing. And I was like, I need to talk to her. So I reached out. We started communicating on Marco Polo because we're all in different parts of the country in the United States. And then she put together a class to teach a few of us more about spirit communication. And I brought in one of my other friends we always share stories because we both have this gift. And so it just became this little core class. And I've been studying with them for a couple of years. And about a year ago, I had a reading from another woman of my faith background, practicing member, who also has the gift of connecting. She calls herself more of an angel reader. She connects to angels on the other side without necessarily specifying who this person is. But in our session, sure enough, Wesley comes through right off the bat. She's like, just a little boy, and he feels like your son, and like this is what he wants to tell you. So it's very specific. But the messaging was very clear. You're supposed to help people with your gift. You're supposed to give readings to people in grief. This is supposed to be part of your grief work. And it's all, you know, it's similar to, you know, your grandma coming through and saying, you're supposed to continue with your songs because they help heal us all. You're supposed to write your book because it helps heal. You're supposed to share your gift with people because it helps them heal. Like, share, be open, do these things, right? And so that was a little scary for me because I was like, I hadn't really thought about integrating into my grief work. And then I had 2 other readings within the same month in my practice group, in 2 separate practice groups. So people that hadn't heard, you know, me being told this information gave me the exact same information. It was like the same reading 3 times.
Wow.
You're supposed to do this work. You're supposed to help people connect to their loved ones to help them heal. And your son, Wesley, is a big part of this. Like, he's going to help you. They all came up with that. And they said, you're supposed to teach classes. And it was a little overwhelming, but I was like, okay. And so, you know, we get to decide when you go to a professional like this and they give you input, you ultimately get to decide what you do. And so I kind of molded over myself. I took it to prayer. I thought about it. I really took it to heart, and I wanted to find out what felt right for me, because if truly my son feels like this is a good path for me, I'm going to be able to get that message myself. I don't just need to rely on somebody else to get it, right? I already know how to connect to him. So I really sincerely thought about, does this feel right for me? And the answer was yes, it does feel right. And so I started marketing myself as a grief coach and medium. And I started doing paid sessions with people as I've been practicing for a while, and I started doing paid sessions, and it's been so incredible. Like, the healing that I get to experience through other people too. It's like we're doing the journey together.
Wow. Wow. And it's so, I just feel like these places where there's a birth or a death are these spaces, these openings, these portals between heaven and earth that break open our experiences, that break open our gifts, that invite us forward if we are willing to pay attention and listen and be open and trust at some level, trust that that these opportunities in a birth or death, these are opportunities for us to take our understanding of not only this life, but the other life and how it all fits together to a whole nother level.
Right. Right. I think yeah, there's nothing like the death of a child that expands what your box of belief is, right? Because you're willing to do what it takes to connect to them. You're willing to learn new things and, have your paradigm shift. And what I've kind of determined, so I'm still like, I consider myself a religious person and a spiritual person. Honestly, I consider myself a spiritual person first because before religion was ever a thing, like we came from spirit. I mean, we are spirits, right? That came from God, from divine source. But what I say is that, um, the kingdom of God, so this is a Christian perspective, obviously. The kingdom of God, well, I think the kingdom of God is bigger than just Christian. I think it's all of his children, right? But if you were just looking from a Christian lens, the kingdom of God is bigger than any one religion, right? Religions all have different purposes that are good. And it's bigger than that. It encompasses all of us. And perhaps my specific religion, they are really specialized in this corner of the vineyard. Okay. So in my faith background, there's like this mix of Christian teachings and then like ritual, kind of like Old Testament temples, right? Rituals, commandments, covenants. My church really like hones in on that. Very biblical, Old Testament, New Testament, like the meshing of the two. And that's beautiful and very service minded. And that's beautiful, very community oriented. When my son died, we lived in Utah and we were just swept up by our neighbors and community of many of them of our faith, not all of them, but probably 70%, so it's a very strong population of one specific religion. But it was a beautiful experience for us. But I say my specific church is they specialize in this part of the vineyard. I'm in the same vineyard, but I might be in a different corner because my church doesn't really they focus on spiritual gifts, but they don't really go beyond like how to develop them, especially the ministry of angels. You're kind of on your own. It's an independent study at that point. And I think they would be comfortable with me connecting to my own son. I know that they would. Like that makes sense. That's logical. But I think where there would be a sticky part is me putting myself in between two people and saying, I can receive messages for you. They would say, just go get those messages yourself. Most of my clients didn't grow up in a religious household where they were taught about, how to reach to the spirit and how to get messaging and all of that. Like, so I feel like I have a really unique opportunity to help people heal, but it might not be within the scope of the church that I was raised in. And it's been expansive. Like we were talking about, it kind of expands that box and it's beautiful. And I work with clients that are Christian, that are Hindu, Muslim. I have people that are more just kind of agnostic, people that would say they were atheists, but now they're kind of like, I don't know what I am. So I feel like it's a beautiful gift in that you can connect to any of like God's children on this planet. It connects us all. Grief is a connector for all people. We all lose loved ones. We all grieve. We can all like support each other, right? It's a connector. So I love that. It's been very expansive.
Well, this has been a beautiful conversation. So much. Thank you so much, Camille, for joining us today. Will you share a little bit about where people can find you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my website is discoveryourangels.com, and that has links to my music. It has links to my book. I am offering a free class right now on how to strengthen your connection or how to develop a connection with your loved ones on the other side. It's about a 2-hour course. It's a video course on YouTube. And it just kind of helps you develop that muscle a little bit more, recognize when they're speaking to you and how they communicate. And we have some exercises in it where you can intuitively write as you're receiving what they're telling you. That's a fun one. You can book sessions on that website with me. I have lots of reviews and testimonials, and I have a blog on there. So lots of resources, as well as a podcast that I co-host with Elle, who I believe you just recently interviewed, called Through the Veil. So yeah, lots of good stuff on there. Lots of free resources as well. Discoveryourangels.com.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, before we go, a couple of quick questions. And one is, what is the way that you personally strengthen your spiritual muscle as far as like daily, are there daily practices or
Great
weekly
question.
practices that help you to
Yeah.
stay connected spiritually?
Well, my work, honestly, it forces me. If I'm going to connect to people's loved ones on the other side, I have to keep my vibration high. I can't get caught up in anger. I have to kind of let grudges. I have to keep myself at a happy place. That doesn't mean I'm impervious to challenges. I mean, I was having a little like cussing battle with myself earlier today, trying to put together this chair that I just bought, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. I'm still a person. I do stupid things, but like I have to kind of rise above, right? I bring myself back. I do meditation. I have some guided meditations I really like. I do yoga sometimes. Music, uplifting music. Um, I I read. I was reading. I watched The Chosen, and I've been diving back into the Old Testament. It's just been, or the New Testament. It's been fun. There was various ways, but I feel like if I don't keep myself connected to the divine, then I struggle. So I do prayer. I would say prayer and meditation are my top two ways. Just really making sure I'm taking care of myself. There's a lot of self-compassion that's part of grief, and healing that inner child and calming down our own nervous system so that we can receive what the other side is telling us and getting rid of that mind chatter. So mindfulness, which I think encompasses so much, meditation, yoga, mindfulness, and spiritual connectivity to God. Those are my top two.
Wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we?
I think that it's important for us to remember that on this earth, we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. We're here in earth school, and this is the messy middle, and we don't have a lot of closure sometimes. I know I'll always miss my son. I'll always be sad that I'll always want more of a relationship with him. We're just in the middle. So if you feel like your story is messy and incomplete and heavy right now, well, this is like act 2 of a 3-act play. We don't have resolution. It's like expecting resolution in the middle of the Harry Potter series. Things are awry. It's not supposed to be nice and tidy right now. So give yourself so much grace, and remember, we're not here forever, and we come from a more divine source. We're just here to learn, and give yourself grace. It's hard enough. Don't be hard on yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Just, you're doing your best. A lot of self-love can go a long way.
I love that. What a beautiful note to close on. Thank you so much for being here today, Camille.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.